Good morning and welcome. My name is Amy Left. I'm Compass's Communication Coordinator, and I welcome you all to today's presentation on a contemporary approach to managing travel demand with Eric Schreffler and Caleb Winter. Out to all residents in Ada and Canyon counties to please help us track how we are doing by participating in the poll on your screen. Your responses are anonymous and participation is completely voluntary, but this information helps us know who we are reaching within the Valley. We really appreciate your help. Thank you. When considering improvements to the transportation system, the focus is frequently on the supply side of the issue, widening roads, building additional bike paths, or adding buses. However, there is also a demand half of the equation that impacts when, where, and how people are using the transportation system. Transportation Demand Management, or TDM, seeks to provide options and information that can impact an individual's daily transportation decisions, which collectively impact the overall operation of the transportation system, congestion, air quality, quality of life, and more. This workshop will help provide a framework for effectively implementing TDM as an operational strategy, explore how it can support regional goals, provide examples of how transportation demand management can impact traffic operations, discuss the role of technology in shared use mobility, and share how incentivizing choices can be effective. Caleb Winter will also share a case study from Portland, Oregon, and its successes in adopting many TDM strategies. Eric Schreffler is an independent consultant based out of San Diego, California, with over 40 years experience in sustainable transportation planning, focusing on evaluating TDM strategies. Caleb is a senior transportation planner for Metro, the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the Portland, Oregon area. He is focused in his career on finding efficient and sustainable transportation options for all. Just quickly, a few housekeeping items before we start. All participants have been muted. Please enter any questions that you have in the chat box. We'll stop about halfway through the presentation and again at the end for questions and discussion. This presentation is being recorded and will be available later on Compass's YouTube channel. Watch for emails and the Compass website for information on future presentations. And please remember to complete the poll on your screen. Thank you. With that, Eric, I will turn it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Amy. Let me get the ball rolling here. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with all you today. I'm familiar with the region, having done a workshop with the feds, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, being up there for pleasure and I don't know if this is a good or a bad thing, but watching many of my neighbors and friends move to Idaho. And so I know that the sort of the place that you're at on your transportation planning efforts and systems. So I appreciate the opportunity. We're going to try to keep this fairly basic for folks that aren't familiar with demand management. But if we start using jargon or start going down a specific path that is just unfamiliar, it's okay to put in the chat box that you want more definition on that. So let's start with, let's talk about the demand management. Amy said, rightly so, that demand management comes from sort of the classic microeconomic concept of supply and demand. I'm showing my age here, but in the late 70s, there was a comedian named Don Novello, and he had something, his character was Father Guido Sarducci, and he had a 5-minute university because he said after 5 years, you're only going to remember a few things from your 4 years of college. So his final exam for his 5-minute university was in languages, theology, and in economics. If all you remembered was supply and demand, that was all you needed. So here's another way to think about supply and demand that the traffic engineers talk about. And that's something called the VC ratio. That's the volume on the road over the capacity of the road, sort of the percent of capacity that's being used. and that VC ratio gets turned into something called level of service. Well, traditionally, we assumed that we would predict the amount of volume, the amount of traffic on a road, and we would build the capacity to meet that demand, to meet that volume. Well, nowadays, and in your region, we're sort of built out. It's difficult for us to add significant capacity, meaning more roads and more lanes. So nowadays, the capacity is more of a fixed amount, and we try to influence and lower the demand to get better traffic flow. So that's one way to think about demand management. So we wanted to do just a quick poll and ask you, what are some of the ways that you're familiar with, or that you just personally think we could use to manage demand? So we've got a quick poll on this. So any of the things that you're familiar with, or you personally think, if you want to go ahead and fill out the poll. So there's a number of strategies on there. So it looks like there's at least a few people familiar with all of the demand management strategies. Sometimes we don't think of like driving restrictions. There are places that, for air quality reasons, like Mexico City, prohibit half of the drivers in the region from driving based on their license plate. And that's very much a demand management. Pricing, of course, is the ultimate demand management, and the more traditional things like carpooling and public transit. So thanks for filling that out. We just kind of wanted to get a quick idea, and we have a great participation on that. So thank you. So let's move ahead, and let me give you I'll start giving you my idea of how to define demand management. So in this first module, we're going to talk about kind of a conceptual framework to think about demand management. Next, we're going to talk about how demand management can actually influence traffic, sort of day-to-day traffic management, congestion, incidents, etc. We'll have a little bit of a discussion about that. We'll be halfway through, and we'll answer some questions there. And then Caleb has graciously agreed to provide a case study from Portland, and he will be providing that after we have some questions at 10:30. We'll talk about the use of information technology and incentives, which is sort of the new wave of demand management. Have a little bit of a discussion there, and then end with, so once we leave here, how do we communicate to others what the potential benefits of demand management are? So there's lots of definitions. We use the term TDM to mean transportation demand management. It's probably better, more accurately defined as travel demand management, because we're trying to affect travel choices, travel decisions. TDM, as you will hear from Caleb, is often a component of the transportation systems management and operations plans that the Treasure Valley and other regions have. And the feds are including it as a component of active transportation and demand management, sort of putting together all the traffic management and TDM into one concept. So there's different ways of looking at it, but it's all a way to really focus on travel choices. So the Federal Highway Administration of USDOT are the ones that are sort of the keepers of the federal side for demand management. And you can see almost 30 years ago, the definition of demand management was really talking about increasing the number of persons per vehicle, filling those empty seats. Started to talk a little bit about the time and the need for travel, but the main part of it was increasing vehicle occupancy. But now their definition of active demand management looks to reduce or redistribute travel demand to less congested areas. It includes the term incentivize, talking about both the time of, again, of travel. It talks about dynamically managing demand, and that has to do with using real-time information and using sort of a dynamic traffic management solution. So we'll get into some examples of those, but just to show you that that a contemporary view goes beyond sort of traditional mode shift, if you will. So TDM is a set of strategies aimed at maximizing traveler choices, whether it's mode, it's time of day, it's the route that a traveler takes, or even the specific lane that they're in. It depends a lot on real-time information, and it also depends on sort of a set of new apps and technology to help people find those traveler choices. Clearly, the commuter ride program understands this very well, of having to use newer technology to get information to folks, to get them interested, to get them to sign up for choices. So again, it's all about travel choices. So if it goes beyond commuter ride sharing, which is sort of what we started in the 70s and went, what does that mean? Well, it's used for all trip types. It's not just commute trips, but we manage travel to, to a Boise State football game. We try to manage demand for school trips and other trips. The other thing is that it's not just used to manage travel for a mode choice. So it's not just used to influence travel before the decision is made to use the car, but once the decision is made to use a car, it might influence, again, the timing, the route, even the lane that a person uses. It is really meant to be demand management is meant to influence system reliability and performance. If people know they have choices and know that those choices will get them where they want, and they understand the when and the how, demand management will help there. It more and more, and one of the reasons the Federal Highways is so interested, is it's integrated into systems management and operations. It's not just sort of a separate program. It's not just sort of the rideshare program separate from traffic operations. It's very much meant to be integrated with traffic operations. And again, it's used to manage shifts in demand. Some plan, but it can also be used for major incidents. And we'll talk about that as well, including in your region, weather incidents. So here's a conceptual framework about travel choices. This is sort of a mindset that helps lead to this understanding of demand management being all about travel choices. The feds took some folks over to Europe in 2005 to learn about how the Dutch, the English, different were looking at demand management. And the Dutch had this conceptual framework of the sort of trip-making process. And it starts on the left with, we have demand for travel. We need to go to work, to shop, we have basic needs to fill. As those of you that are transportation planners know, travel is a drive demand. Generally people except for teenagers do not drive just to drive. They drive to do something. So there's some demand to meet a need, and travel is included. Now, you can make a decision about the mode or the destination. You can make a decision to fulfill that need from home, be it distance learning or telework. But you can also look at various modes, bike, walk, carpool, van pool, public transit, even some of the newer shared mobility options. So once those trips are either kept at home or shifted to a non-drive alone mode, then we have traffic demand, the amount of cars that are on the road, which will be less. The green circle should be less than the purple circle. Then we can influence the route and the time choice. So we can influence when they're on the road and whether they are using more congested or less congested routes. That leads to network demand, the specific demand on a road at a given time. And then more and more, we're offering people lane choices. It might be a special bus lane, an HOV lane, using the shoulder as a breakdown lane. And so once we have those choices and they're distributed on the system, then there's a toolbox of strategies we can use to go back and affect all those. So we spent a little time on that, but that's sort of the conceptual framework that helps understand the way of demand management being all about travel choices. Again, choices are the key. We talked about mode, destination, route, time, and lane choice being more than just mode choice. And those choices are enabled by an exchange of information, some of the new technologies, operational collaboration between, for example, a van pool program and a traffic operations center, roadside and in-vehicle technology that helps drivers and cars become smarter. We're going to talk about financial mechanisms to incentivize people to try. Smartphones are just a huge enabler of real-time, consumer-oriented travel choices, and all those are sort of wrapped up into shared mobility. So now looking at the bigger picture of how demand management fits into sort of regional goals, one of the things about TDM is it ticks a lot of the boxes. In the case of the Treasure Valley, be it sort of from a regional planning standpoint or your corridor planning like you're doing on I-84 or even down to the local level, TDM can influence and impact a lot of regional goals like livability, which is really big to your region, the environment, economic development. So one of the things I wanted to show was out of your long-range plan update, here are 4 of the major goals: economic vitality, safety, convenience, and quality of life. Clearly, travel choices, offering travel choices, makes actually for a more vital economic system. We found out from the pandemic, one thing we found out was that people were comfortable working from home and want to continue to do it, and it helps with their quality of home life. Safety is not directly impacted, but if people again have choices and feel that their choice is more safe than another choice, that's more of a personal. TDM in some cases is very convenient. In other cases, it might add time. And finally, quality of life. Clearly, people want travel choices. There have been polls done where a lot of regions have sought a sales tax increase for public transit. And afterwards, they go in and they try to figure out why it won or lost. And interestingly, people that vote for it don't necessarily plan to use public transit, but they view public transit as an important choice, an important part of their region. So TDM can really help with those regional goals. So really, TDM comes in a real variety of strategies, from traditional public transit, carpooling, but then all these new apps and shared mobility and scooter share and bike share. There's just a lot of different ways, and we're going to try to provide examples of a lot of those different as we go along today. So we're going to talk again. I'm just going to review what we're going to do today. We talked a little bit right now about the new definition of demand management, sort of going beyond contemporary ride sharing. Now, I should say, and I didn't say, contemporary traditional commuter ride sharing is still super important. Carpooling is still the second largest mode after drive alone, and carpooling still meets a lot of needs for school trips, for commuter trips. So by beyond, it probably should be in addition to, because commuter ride sharing is still very, very important, but how do we build on it? We're going to talk next about integrating demand management and traffic management. Caleb's going to give his example from the Portland region. We're going to talk about using technology and incentives as well. And finally, communicating the benefit. Now, the Federal Highway Administration has a whole variety of resources. And at the very last slide that we present, so you have to wait till the end. We will give the URL to get access to this, but if you go into Federal Highways Operations website, you can look up different strategies like traffic management, demand management, different things. And there are really a lot of great resources with great examples that you're just beyond the ability to do in 2 hours. So I think that's it for the first part. I need to switch to the second part. So just give me 1 second. All right, Amy, can we see it?
Yes, you can, Eric.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So the first of sort of 3 ways of looking at demand management is demand management and traffic management. Again, we'll also talk about incentives as well. But you know, one of the things is that when Amy and Hunter first started talking about this, the comment was made that that the Treasure Valley's transportation system is starting to sort of be built out. Again, it's sort of difficult to add a lot of major capacity. The region is growing significantly. Both Boise and a lot of the communities along 84 are really growing and growing with people that want a high quality of life. And so, you know, Amy's request to do a workshop on this had to do with, well, we're sort of getting to where we've sort of built out. What can we do to get ahead of the curve to manage the system so that people still get the travel reliability that they want? And because of that, we want to focus a little bit on traffic management. Is there a way, particularly as, for example, the region is going through a review of I-84 and how to manage that corridor? Is there a way to integrate demand management into that in a meaningful way? And we're going to try to provide a couple examples of that. So TDM was really born of the gas crises in the 1970s. Again, I'm aging myself, but I got into this industry right after the 2 Arab oil embargoes. And for energy reasons, the federal government decided that highway funds could be used for transit and rideshare programs. It was focused on mode shift at the time. It worked largely with employers and commuters directly. Again, still very, very vital partners, employers and commuters, employers with their work schedule practices, their on-site amenities, commuters having access to the information. Ride sharing was largely about matching people into carpools and van pools. Van pools are still a very important component because van pools are very efficient in that rather than being 2 or sometimes 3 people in a car, you know, you're talking about 6, 8, 10 people in a van. And from a reduction of traffic and of air quality or improvement of air quality, van pooling is very efficient with reducing those trips. And finally, while congestion mitigation is a longer-term objective of a lot of TDM programs, TDM can start to be thought of as a more direct operational strategy, particularly when it comes to events, major incidents, etc. So let's talk a little bit about some of that. So how about TDM versus traffic management? You know, traffic managers and TDM professionals often speak a very different language. I'm a planner by trade, and I use a different lexicon than traffic engineers or systems operations engineers use. You know, from traffic manage, it's very much engineering terms. They talk about incidents, reliability, corridors, connected vehicles. Whereas on the demand management side, a lot of what we do is integrated into the planning process. It's all about choices. It's all about sustainability of having demand management be a more meeting some of the 3 major sustainability goals: economic vitality, inclusiveness, and environmental impacts. TDM uses terms like gamification. We'll talk about that in a minute. and shared use. The whole shared use economy is really big and something that is sort of on the TDM side. So both parties sort of speak a different language, but it will end up being integrated into the same place, as you'll see in some of the examples. So how can they better relate to each other? Well, let's talk about travel today. Transportation is multimodal more and more, particularly again with the advent of scooter, bike sharing, information, multimodal transportation centers, mobility hubs. So transportation is multimodal. We think about all trips, we think about the whole trip chain, but travelers expect a seamless experience. They don't expect to have to go to different apps to find their way to get something together. So by working together, TDM professionals and traffic managements can create more travel choices that can more effectively manage travel. Still talking the abstract a little bit, so we'll try to get more specific. So where does traffic management and demand management come together? This might be a little bit hard to see, but there's all the traditional traffic management, incident management, variable speed limits, queue warning on the traffic side. On the demand side, there's employer-based outreach, carpool, vanpool type services. But in the middle, we start to see some strategies that sort of fit both areas. Priority treatment for transit is something that is a traffic strategy, but can increase travel times for transit riders. Congestion pricing is something that's not terribly popular, but it's among the most effective things. On the other side of pricing is incentives, and incentives can be specifically targeted to address specific traffic issues, and we'll give an example of that. Managed lanes, HOV, HOT. I'll say this more than once, but it's probably time, and I think there's some agreement internally that Idaho reconsider its policy on HOV. HOV actually gives you a lot of options with priced managed lanes, high occupancy toll lanes, and HOT, HOV is something that probably could be considered. Emergency transportation operations, transit, carpool, vanpool can be brought in during major incidents, major weather, natural disasters. So there is some place where they come together, and probably the main place they come together is in traveler information. The traffic management folks develop real-time information that can be fed to travelers before they leave. So travelers can not only find out what the travel time is, but what their options are, which is literally, travel time is the traffic management side, travel options is demand management, and they could come together in a single app. So on the traffic management side, giving real-time conditions to travelers is really important, both from data coming in from the system to specific cameras. Traffic management can provide traffic control that is a physical way of really restricting traffic to favor, if you will, other modes. It might be a carpool bypass on a ramp meter, etc. And again, the traffic management centers seem to be the repository of traveler information, and it's where the demand management side can leverage that traveler information. Demand management has direct connections to travelers through relationships with employers and employees and travelers that come into contact with the commuter ride program and others. Is an important connection to the traffic side. You might want to think of traffic as managing the vehicles in some ways, and demand is managing the people. TDM uses a lot of marketing and awareness. Innovations in understanding travel behavior is we're understanding more and more why people make the decisions we make. But also demand management has brought some great new partnerships. Again, for example, the use of transit, carpools and vanpools in the case of a major emergency, the models of employers now becoming more interested again in telework, having chambers of commerce, having real estate developers working with demand management folks and traffic operations folks to look at specific site-specific problems is a form of a new partnership. So what are those specific collaboration opportunities? Well, on a day-to-day basis, again, demand management, that traveler information that's linked to options. So you're given information about, for example, a major slow up or an incident. But then if you're given options of other routes, of the transit option, of emergency carpooling, you can customize travel information to include those travel options. And again, a lot of this comes in together through integrated corridor management, which should look at both the demand, the traffic management elements of corridor management, but also the demand elements, maybe working specifically with developers and employers in the specific corridor to look at travel flows. We just talked about emergency management. And active demand management is really, again, using that traveler information to help affect demand strategies and to affect traveler choices in a very active, dynamic way, where the traffic operations center is feeding perhaps an app that is also being fed by the demand management program to give people real-time travel choices. I just brought this back to again show that traffic management is something that we start to deal with after we've had people make their mode and destination choices, but people can also make a choice to change mode en route, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So I just want to bring this up to show that, again, there is a difference between managing travel and managing traffic. So what are some of the more contemporary ways of looking at mode and destination choice? Well, there's in route mode shift, and I'm going to show you an example of that in a second, where you actually induce people that are driving into a region, they get to a congested part, there's an option to get off and use transit, and we'll show you how that works. There's new forms of bus rapid transit. There's new forms of making transit more emulating almost fixed route with stations, with real-time information, with increased travel times. There's the use of ride-hailing services. More and more people are using Lyft and Uber to provide, for example, late-night transit, a late-night transit option, or Uber and Lyft and all these companies have their own carpooling type programs. And of course, the bike, scooters, and walking are a new avenue. My son was offered a job at a university here in San Diego, and he's about 2 blocks from a light rail station at both ends, and he went out and bought an electric skateboard for that last mile. So on destination choice, the pandemic has shown a bright light on work and commute habits. We always said there was a pretty large proportion, 20% of the workforce that could do remote work, but a lot of employers were reluctant to do it. But once they were forced to do it, there's this whole dynamic going on right now where employers are saying, a buddy of mine works for a large bank. He'll be going back in the office 2 days a week, including Wednesday, the core day, when everybody has to be in, and then he can work at home for 3 days. That was a negotiated deal between the employer and the employee. So destination choice can include both work at home, but you could also work at a facility that's closer to where you are, to a school site that's closer to where you are. So that's on the destination side. So let me give you a couple of examples, and the one is this in-route mode shift. I included the one on the right only because when I was doing my Google search, looking for this one sign that's on the left, I found that in Arizona they had a contest looking for funny road variable message signs, and they were a crack up. But the one for the season was really great. I really like this one. So on the left is this real-time message sign to divert car users into transit. On the San Francisco Peninsula, in this case in San Jose, San Mateo counties, as you drive up 101, you find out from this variable message sign that the freeway travel time is 52 minutes to get into, in this case, San Jose, I guess going the opposite direction. But Caltrain will take 41 minutes, 12 minutes, or 11 minutes faster, and the train comes at 5:30. So if the time to park, get on a train is significantly less than the time into downtown San Jose in this case, this was something that Caltrans and Berkeley put together to actually induce a change before the vehicle got to the most congested area. They've done this a lot in Germany as well. What about route choice and time choice? Well, in terms of route, having real-time comparative travel times is really useful. Having proactive traffic alerts of telling people what the travel time on different routes, or simply saying that your typical route, there are apps that will push to you that your typical route is now running 20, 30, 40% longer than usual. Here is a different route that you might want to take. A lot of you know that we do that on a regular basis in our radio, our traffic updates from radio and TV. On the time choice, we have staggered and flex hours to sort of move people out of the most congested areas. But we'll also talk about something called rush hour avoidance, which is really very interesting, and even about parking pricing, trying to get people to park at places and at times that are less congested. In terms of route choice and mode choice, incident management is also a big part. So, here's an example of in the greater New York area where a train had been put out of action for a couple of days. It was the rideshare program working with the state DOT that came together and say, if you travel in this corridor, if you have to drive, here's parking ride lots. If you want to share a ride, if you want to use different transit. So there's a way for major incidents for choices to be made on a short-term basis and not a long-term basis. In terms of parking management, there's an example from San Francisco where they tied on-street parking pricing to time of day based on demand and congestion, and they really were able to get drivers to change their time and travel, and they were able to reduce far fewer greenhouse gas emissions. And interestingly, the reason for having parking pricing was to get around double parking so that the buses could get through downtown faster. And then finally, in terms of lane choice, something that's not super common in states like Idaho, but more and more states do have HOV lanes that can be converted to toll lanes where a single driver can pay to use the HOV lanes in underutilized timing. Bus signal priority is huge, can really induce bus travel times and bus travel time reliability. Bus only lanes, use of the hard shoulder and bus on the hard shoulder, and we'll talk about that. So in terms of day-to-day operations, there's an example of putting buses on the shoulder of a highway. So when you have a full shoulder on a highway, that's normally the breakdown lane. Makes sense. But as you have lower and lower speeds, as congestion increases, and that breakdown lane is safer to travel in because it's easier to get in and out, and it's just safer at lower speeds. There's a number of places where state DOTs, metropolitan organizations, and their transit operators are using the hard shoulder to provide bus. Now, of course, that includes better removal of accidents when they happen, but it's a relatively cheap and quick way to provide for much faster bus travel times. Just something to think about. So really what's needed to realize integration? It's trustworthy travel information, it's new partnerships that are formed with the private sector, public sector, the folks that create some of the new apps, the shared mobility folks. TDM can be integrated into planning for operations and is part of the so-called TSMO, Transportation Systems Management and Operations. And of course, as with almost any way of looking at change, it has to do with better communication. I think I have missed a slide. So I'm going to give you a quick example of a, oh no, I'm sorry, it comes in incentives. I told you about something called rush hour avoidance, and we'll talk about that in a little bit later. But rush hour avoidance is literally paying people to stay off the road at the most congested time. If there's this one 15-minute period that's really bad and really affected by a couple of on-ramps, you work with the employers in that area. You may work with others, but one of the ways, and the Dutch came up with this, is literally paying people to stay off the road. So we'll talk about that when we talk about incentives. So that's it for traffic management and TDM. Let's take another quick poll, and then we're going to open it up for questions. The second poll is, can TDM help manage traffic in the Treasure Valley? After you have heard me say, all these crazy ideas, and the current situation on 84 and major arterials, other places, how much can demand management really help affect traffic? And don't be shy. If you think this stuff just doesn't make sense to integrate, it's okay. So looking at the poll as we go through, and you guys are really quick at this stuff. You guys are great. You know, my suspicion was that it would probably be viewed as something that that will help in the future as, you know, TSMO plans, integrated corridor management plans, regional plans come together. But I love the fact that a third of you think that it already is helping to manage traffic, and that's great. That's I agree. I think a lot of times we in the TDM world don't think that we affect day-to-day traffic sometimes, and in traffic operations, folks don't see demand management as being a day-to-day strategy. So it's great to see that that we're probably feeling pretty good about what this can do. But you know, the theory, the conceptual framework, the 1-minute examples are great, but I am just so pleased that that Caleb has agreed to give his time, and thanks to Metro to offering his time, because Portland has done a tremendous job at integrating demand management into the planning process and into specific strategies that impact traffic. And so I am going to jump out of here and invite Caleb to come in and provide what he can about Portland.
Great, thanks, Eric. I'll just take a moment to queue up my slides. All right, you seeing those slides? I'll take that as a yes.
Oh, yes, we are.
Great. So yeah, just to manage expectations, you know, we've talked about most everything Eric's mentioned in our region, but certainly have a long journey to go to arrive at that, you know, active demand management ideal. But yep, my name is Caleb Winter. I'm the Transportation System Management and Operations Program Manager at Metro, Senior Transportation Planner. And I also work with our Regional Travel Options group, which is our transportation demand management. And that's where I got my start. And about 1996, it was actually first with an internship to build out our light rail system. And then the next year I got a job working on research in our transportation demand management group. That was at TriMet. Funds moved around, changes happened, and a lot of the work got brought over to Metro in 2006. So I reapplied for my job and luckily got it, and then started. That's when TSMO planning started in earnest in the region, but I didn't join. I offered some help on the TDM side in 2010, and then took over program management in 2014. I love Boise. I've stayed the night downtown and went to Bar Guernica. I love the Basque food and would like to try more. Wish I was there in person with you all. I've been through most recently at the Electrify America charging station, so that wasn't a particularly long visit, but yeah, I just love being in Idaho. I've been at the Craters of the Moon and Coeur d'Alene and Wallace, and I'm just down the road from you on I-84. So we've got some I-84 slide coming up here. So Amy, Eric, Hunter, they asked me to describe some of why we got started in TDM in the Portland metro region, how our program works. And through the mid-90s, we were looking at land use and transportation connections. And that's when our urban growth boundary really came into a policy existence. And that was really driven by a public process where we had to decide, are we going to grow out? Are we going to grow right in downtown, lots of tall buildings, Vancouver, BC, I guess, or are we going to, connect our historic downtowns in our cities, over 20 cities around the region. And so the popular choice was to expand in our existing urban centers and connect those with travel options. And air quality was a problem then. We were non-attainment. We had a lot of haze. We couldn't see Mount Hood, which is maybe 50 miles. On a clear day, you can see it really well. And, the air quality was definitely an issue. And of course, congestion, we were working towards multimodal investments, investing in building out the transit system. And, one thing I don't think Eric mentioned was that transportation demand management grew out of a best practice from electric utilities, which is, why build another power plant? It was very costly when you can work on the side of managing demand and avoid that huge capital expense. And so I think it's the same is still true in the transportation system. So I'm a planner now. Didn't start out that way, but certainly working at the region. So next few slides are on planning. Just 4 parts of our process, kind of help us away from new shiny things. We're not immune to that, but the process really emphasizes stakeholders and partnerships. We're working to implement the regional transportation plan. That's the one plan. And then we have these strategies that support our implementation, and we work through a stakeholder process. Then we're able to fund program pieces at a regional level to make a difference. We're not the biggest budget in the region, but we have some ways to help out. And then we're evaluating our results. So on the policy side, there's we're updating regional transportation plan every 3-4 years, and that the community-driven, all these policies you're seeing here were important, but through the community process, the ones in gold were really emphasized that we need reliability in our transportation system. Just find where my notes went. So congestion relief, congestion management, that all continued and was voiced by the community and how we work with transportation. That safety and security is very important. Protect the climate, provide equitable transportation, and as a government and investing public funds, we're have a transparent process. Also, just in how we prioritize and go through the policy, we're accountable to what we do. So each strategy, is to carry out these policies and implement them. And the strategy process, I scrolled too far. So we have many strategies to implement the RTP: freight, transit, safety, equity, bicycle and pedestrian, and among those are the TSMO and TDM strategies. The stakeholders meet and advise this planning process. Takes a year or longer, especially with contracting time, but yields dividends in the long run. It provides us direction across many people at a variety of agencies and in various leadership roles and staff capacity. So, and I can share, over the years for the TDM side of our activities, we've really grown, from an employer-focused TDM program to working in neighborhoods, working with a residential focus, working with schools, parks, visitors, and tourists. And then along the way, we've had academic researchers help out, and consultant community has really grown around helping with TDM. And like I was mentioning earlier, we have some funding that goes into what we can spend from our regional flexible funds as the MPO. That's made up of CMAQ funds and STBG, sorry for the acronyms, congestion mitigation, air quality federal funds, and then surface transportation block grant funds. So we get a small portion to fund a TDM and TSMO program. For TDM, it's roughly $2 million per year. And we could go to organizations, nonprofits, any initiatives that help achieve our goals, reduce car dependence, encourage walking, biking, transit, carpooling. And but we get into a process of grant making to spend those funds. So first we need to inspire applications, develop the criteria, how to score those, and then we offer 200,000 where they requested 300,000. So we've got to negotiate, down to 2/3 of what they proposed to do. Maybe something didn't fit with TDM or policy direction or something, or was not eligible, or we just didn't have the funds. So it's quite a process. And then once we enter into a grant agreement, which is basically a contract, our program and my fellow staff are working to provide technical support, and we're partners through their process. So this is kind of a decentralized approach. Metro does offer some direct coordination, but a lot of our work is done through partnerships. We're reviewing invoices and then evaluating. We're paying for them to gather data, but we also do a regional evaluation. And that is, I was talking with Eric and setting this up, and that really all of what I mentioned is project development, and the technical support and a partnership and evaluation. If you're developing this into a STIP or MTIP project, the funding process, that works fine too. What we found in our region is that we were competing along, sidewalk projects, complete street projects, some great capital investments, and the meetings got pretty tense about, what's our next priority to invest in. And so the tension between regional programs, even like transit-oriented development, or just all of those things, we put into a first part of the regional funding policy process. And so that gets ironed out with what they're willing to spend on programs. And then we go on to the capital projects as a separate competitive process. So this two-step process has really helped not have so much friction between what's needed as regional program support or capital projects. Let's see, we collect all this data back from our investments, but also combined it with some other data into a TDM inventory. The purpose of the inventory is to develop a better picture of how programs and services are distributed across the region, and helps anyone interact and find out if they're proposing a grant, where they might do that. So hopefully it's inspiring grant applications. We're showing where commute TDM is done with employers, universities. We track where the shared mobility services are. Metro has supported the start of Bike Town, which is a bike sharing service, but we don't have ongoing operations. A lot of them are private, but we've worked with coordinating and what policies should be in place to get equitable distribution of e-scooters and things. And then the planning and infrastructure, the policy requires that locals incorporate TDM into their transportation system plans. And so this is keeping that part of keeps an eye on what's put down into local planning. And then we inherited Safe Routes to School when Oregon DOT stopped funding that. Not up on exactly why they decided that, but it was very valuable in our region. So we work with a lot of K through 12 schools and school districts, counties and we would just work on the outreach and education side of Safe Routes to School, not the capital side. So we're not putting in speed bumps, but we're offering the walking school bus, how to organize that, how to do training and safety. Actually, we have some, the most recent thing is we have like a little traffic playground course where people can bike through, mock streets on a playground and, learn safe bicycling from that. Let's see. Just a lot of examples of TDM activities and kind of who works on them. We do have support statewide. Oregon DOT did a topic plan. So whereas they have a freight modal plan and transit modal plan, for TDM, they did a topic plan. And that culminates in them putting funds into supporting the statewide carpool matching. They do an annual challenge with achievements and incentives on the Ride Amigos platform. We're supporting our van. Well, Metro is no longer supporting van pools, but they it's kind of CTRAN, which is the Clark County across the river, Columbia River in Vancouver, Washington. They've been supporting van pool commutes into the region, and Washington's built out a bigger infrastructure for van pools. And then Enterprise is a private partner working with them. So I don't want to go through all of these examples, but just to make the point that, well, actually, I should go through a few more examples because I've talked about commuter TDM, but we also do a lot of work with community-based organizations. What wayfinding needs do they have for, we can do sharrows or bike signs, walking guides, and we've worked with parks on trails and accessibility assessments of trails. So put out what post what information where somebody with a wheelchair can best access trails. So just a lot of variety there. Let's see. And we're getting results through evaluations. A big thing for our land use goals is to get a good mode share across these cities and towns and main streets. And so in the central city, downtown Portland, we want to see a lot higher mode share. And this is just commuter mode share that I'm showing on the right. And the commute stats certainly give us some big numbers about new walking trips, tons of CO2 reduced, auto trips prevented, VMT reduced, and dollars saved. And it's good to reflect that, but it really isn't the way we're not able to measure all of that across, what are very worthy partnerships and different approaches to TDM that we do through that stakeholder partnership. Let's see. I should mention also, we do have an ECO rule here, employee commute options rules from the Department of Environmental Quality that compels employers with 100 employees or more to survey every couple of years and do a good faith effort. It's not required that they reduce auto trips, but they need a good faith effort that they're offering TDM solutions to employees. Let's see, and so yeah, some of our grants just track participation, and just watching and doing a better job tracking that, we see participation rising from 55,000 to 220,000 people over the years. Let's see. And we also encourage our partners to form other partnerships in local communities, and we've seen that increase 137%. Let's see. Sometimes it's hard to isolate the contribution. When we had an e-bike pilot, we wouldn't have known much if we hadn't devoted a lot of funding on how people are using these e-bikes. So a project like that might take 50% of your budget just for the research alone, and doing it independent. So it's, and that was a partnership with Portland State University. And then you're able to scale up if there's something to be learned. We haven't scaled up e-bikes ourselves, but the Bike Town, City of Portland's effort on bike sharing has gone to e-bikes.
Eric,
And then, what?
we're still seeing the slide that says evaluations get results.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes, I was trying to go into a few of the, where we're measuring and where we're, yeah. But let me.
That's great. I just thought I could hear you clicking, so I thought maybe you were changing slides. That's all.
No, but let's pivot over to, before I mention that, I want to say that another thing on the evaluation topic, we did a regional phone survey. So got a random sample of people and asked, in the past 12 months, have you biked, walked, used a mobility device, took transit, carpool, drove alone? How frequently did you do that over the past 12 months? And responses showed residents use 3.5 modes on average over the course of a year. And so I'd just like to point out, 3 to 4 different modes is what a majority of the regions uses. And so driving alone is not really a monolith. And it's important work that that TDM does to inform people of their travel choices, even if they're only going to use them a little bit. It's resilient if there's a big snowstorm and they want the bus is still moving on chains and they don't want to drive their small compact vehicle, or whatever it is. We're getting ready for a big earthquake, so biking certainly would be a good choice if roads are disrupted. So integrating TDM in 2010 is when we started our strategic work. And put a lot, TSMO is a big umbrella that, involves this traffic management approach, incident management, coordination, providing traveler information, and the transportation demand management came under that approach. Getting information to people's hands, onto screens, where they're about to take the system was important. And what I think of as TDM is the upstream approach before somebody actually decides to choose bike, walk, or take transit, drive, or carpool. And then once they do, traffic engineers, transit, and other operators work to provide a safe and reliable trip. That's how I see them working together. We needed a TSMO strategy as well to start that stakeholder process to really start funding it at a programmatic level as well, and incorporate federal direction, establish performance measures, and all that. Let's see. One example about getting information into people's hands that shows its effectiveness. And we invested a lot of research dollars. So even though it's an old example, it was we had a new light rail line start, and we did this residential approach. And we just asked people, what type of information do you want? If you're driving alone, you want to try learn more about transit and biking. You want to learn more about telecommuting and carpooling. It's just choose your own menu. And then there was a control group that didn't get any of this information. And just on transit with this new service, which you think you build the transit and people will come. Well, if you tell them about it, more people will come. And that's what the graph is showing. Without individualized marketing, ridership increased 24% across all the transit, bus, and light rail. And then with that information, it went up 44%. So, really primed the growth of transit. And, this is what an integrated system might look like, where, again, the choice is in your hand, get a lot of information. How's the system performing? Congestion is known, transit service is known. And then, but once you do choose transit, for example, sort of in the middle, there's transit signal priority. If that bus is running late, what can we do as system managers to give it transit signal priority and help that bus catch up to its schedule and provide a reliable journey? And another reason when we got into TSMO was, what would it take? What would it take to restore reliability through TDM? And this sort of, we're going through COVID and a recession now, but in 2009, it was the housing bubble, the Great Recession, and that took a lot of commute trips off the road. And it was, it's bad time. But what we got out of it was, if there's a slightly lower volume in traffic on the freeway, and this is one of our most congested points, going north on Interstate 5, crossing into Vancouver, Washington, that even removing a small portion of auto trips off that facility resulted in more reliability, higher speeds, and that's what you'll see throughout TSMO literature. That if we could just in real time impact maybe 4% of people's decisions to take some other mode or carpool other than driving alone, we could restore that capacity and reliability in the system. And we did this planning through integrated corridor management on I-84. So it's showing downtown on the left, and then where I-84 starts to our eastern suburb of Troutdale. And we just got together all the operators, cities, counties, Port of Portland, and ODOT in that right of way, and talked about, we have this whole corridor to manage. It's got a lot of arterials, major and minor. It's got the throughway capacity on the freeway, and we have max light rail running through here, so transit. We also have a new rapid transits, or a small version of bus rapid transit on Division. So there's kind of parallel ways to get through the corridor. And what can we do to help people in a real time? So this is just planning. I don't have results from this, but you see the cluster of strategies we came up with. We need to think about the detours and how people are routed around some major incident. When we need to coordinate, we're going to need some data sharing to have situational awareness of what's going on in the system. We don't need to know everything about construction schedules, because a lot of that is about permitting. We just need to know when the cones go down and lanes are closed, facilities closed. We'd like to work with the third-party, disruptors, Waze, Google, that are channeling traffic through, maybe a school zone when school's just about to get out. We want to have build in some safety into this corridor. And then as part of that, implement a dynamic multimodal travel demand management. The strategy example is to work with the employers in the corridor and have them offer the incentives in real time. And that is really a goal. And we've brought that into our update of the TSMO strategy. And we've also combined it with, where are the regions going with mobility on demand? TriMet is, innovating on their tool, and it's Open Trip Planner tool. So the source code is available to any region. And it starts out with, the general transit feed spec, putting all the route information in, but then expands from there. And so, Metro and our TDM program started supporting their early work when they built in how you can combine a bike trip with transit and save some time that way. And then, shared use mobility through Bike Town shared bikes that are the orange dots all scattered around. That comes into play. The e-scooters, or combining with one of the ride-hailing companies. They didn't both want to be on the platform, Uber and Lyft, but so Lyft was originally going to be on there, and then Uber said they'd be on there, and then Lyft dropped out. Anyway, it was a little bit of a change. But here, just a screen capture, I'm showing that, for my bike and transit combination trip, I can choose a bike-friendly trip, or I can choose the flattest route if I don't want to do a lot of hill climbing, or just speed or fewest transfers on that trip. So there's some customization, and just to reflect some time savings, this trip from one of my favorite Japanese bakeries to a Japanese grocery store is, I'm cutting this down by a third the time if I just ride my bike from that bakery, hop on the light rail, and then take my bike off and ride the rest of the way. Otherwise, that's 2 transfers. It take 2 buses and light rail to get there and spend a lot more time in transit. And one of their innovations is in the fine print here, you may not be able to see it. It says this trip uses real-time traffic and delay information. And they've put in some machine learning with, with their transit routes to show, to reflect when you'll likely arrive using this trip plan and itinerary. So thank you very much. I probably went on a little too long, but I really appreciate the opportunity to share, and I'll put some links in the chat.
Caleb, thank you very much. We were ahead of schedule, so it worked out well.
Good.
And I think it's just important for people to see real examples. We're going to go into a time now of answering some questions and a little bit of a discussion. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to take specific questions for Caleb about Portland, and then answer some questions you have in the chat, or have some more, a little bit broader discussion, because the chat questions were really good. Caleb, one of my couple of reactions to what I saw was you have dedicated funding, so that takes a lot of the annual hassle out of fighting against other, the stovepipe and fighting against other modes. So dedicated funding is an important part of what you do. You're involved in many different kinds of trips, not just work trips. The fact that you guys are working on safe routes to school is, I think, really cool. But that example of that small shifts can have a big impact at a very localized level is huge. You saw that example of where a small shift at a specific place on the freeway system, a small reduction in cars could lead to a significant increase in speed, I think is a great example. A couple other things is I noticed that your travel information system that TriMet put together, where you're using real-time information and providing the full options for people. That was a question we had in the chat, and we can go a little bit more into that, but how we make that happen, because you sort of talked about some of the issues of having open source for the data, and then also you have the Ubers and Lyfts that don't want to be in the same room. So those are those kind of issues. So thank you again, Caleb, very much. It was really, really excellent. So if you don't mind using the hand raising option, if you've got a specific question of Caleb first, we'd like to open that up to see if people have specific questions, and Amy will open your mic if you've got a specific question for Caleb. Otherwise, we will move on to.
I saw Hunter asked a question, so I could start talking about that one. Amy, did you have a question?
No, I was just gonna say I can read the questions in the chat. We'll start with those, and then after we've addressed those, we can raise hands for additional questions, and then we will have some discussion as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'll start. I'm going to go ahead and read that question out loud,
Okay.
Caleb, directly to you. If you can talk a little bit more about the dedicated funding that Metro has available for the TDM strategies, kind of specifically, what were some of the influencing factors that drove Metro to make that decision to have the dedicated funding? Do you know where some of the first biggest TDM investments were, and what were some of the early lessons learned?
So hopefully I can answer all those questions. That when we started a regional program, there were basically when DEQ was passing the eco rules, there was this question like, how are we going to assist all the employers in supporting their employees through travel options? And you couldn't have this disincentive, or you couldn't have the regulation without having some providing the guidance to go with it. So that meant we had to support the outreach, and TriMet was chosen to really take that on, and we started managing grants to TMAs and to transportation management associations, were nonprofits that several are still in existence, and some have been in existence and then not received enough support to continue. Anyway, so we helped start these nonprofits, And we've decided, and looking at results of mode splits and VMT saved, they performed just a mixed at a mixed levels. And some of them were housed in chambers and Chamber of Commerce and didn't necessarily have the mission. So what we learned was we in a way it's less expensive to work with a nonprofit, but they have to have an aligned mission, and and that and then the funding I guess has the most results. So that's kind of how we pivoted from essentially a grant program just for TMAs to a lot broader scope, because we saw also those results I shared from residential outreach, and City of Portland was leading that. We're going to fund more of that. So so it kind of built through that. And then the funding level has been pretty flat. We haven't we don't necessarily go through big increases in funding for TDM. Is the last increase, two last increases. One was for climate policy, because we recognized in planning modeling approach that if you combine building out transit service and TDM and TISMO approaches, you get a big bang for your buck. And so we all got a little bit of increased funds to do the work there, get to more employers, get to more residents. And then the when Safe Routes to School came across, the regional leaders all decided we would increase the program to cover those costs. So that kind of is some of the story about how funding has gone, and I described how that we didn't want the fight to pit a regional program against a capital project. It was causing these really strange conversations at a regional decision-making table, and at a staff level, a lot of planners were I don't know, kind of lobbying where partnership was needed more than that. And we also had that dynamic at a regional table where at first we had a subcommittee that would divvy up these regional program funds. That didn't work. So in our grant scoring process, we only have partners. We have like a public health person who hasn't, from a county that hasn't put in any application for TDM, and so can score, with just looking at the merits of the projects. So and we as staff don't score the projects either. We can assist in the project development. So that's kind of where the funding process, and then evaluation has to be transparent. Portland State University has done it. Consultants have taken our data and done it. So what we're reflecting back to the leaders is that we haven't made up our own results. We're sharing something that's been through an independent process. Hopefully that answers it.
Thank you, Caleb.
Yeah.
A question going back, I think to Eric about traffic control, is what research is going into traffic control systems interacting with autonomous or intelligent vehicles? And are there any protocols emerging to address that?
Yeah, the feds are really big on that right now. And they were sort of pinning a lot of their hopes on that. There were regions that were even delaying decisions on capacity improvements, literally widenings, thinking they would get more efficient with intelligent vehicles. But my own sense is that things have waned a little bit, maybe a little bit. I mean, the pandemic just threw a wrench in everything, but there's an issue of how much of whether a large proportion of drivers would accept releasing 100% control of the vehicle. So there is a lot of work that's still going on, but I don't think it's been, my own personal opinion is there really hasn't been a resolution. It's not the big one only solution that maybe it was being pitched as 5 or 10 years ago. Yes, the feds in particular are putting protocols together, and the ITS world is doing that. But my own personal opinion is that I think we're a ways. I don't think it's Again, there are regions that literally said, we're not going to do solution X in 5 years because in 10 years, all traffic's going to be fine because of intelligent vehicles. And I don't think we're quite there.
Yeah, I think, if you look at technology cycles, we're in the trough of disillusionment. There's a whole map, visual of how, the hype cycle, we went through that with automated vehicles, and we really, we had all kinds of conferences around how this is going to change downtowns, and, do we build a parking garage because it's going to be a 50-year investment that we don't need? And, that may be true when you look that long range out. But so far, it seems like automated vehicles can really help in a shuttle service capacity, in a more closed environment. And that, they may also be able to help, in just other collision avoidance, especially on freeways. And that should keep, introduce some more reliability, and then there's truck platooning. But yeah, it's clearly the technology is still having issues with all the sensors and all the machine learning on the open street environment with all edge case scenarios. So, and then in terms of infrastructure, we started to look at that. What basically we're just in our region making intersections smarter. Updated advanced traffic controllers. That's a platform where you can plug in additional sensors. And so the ones we're piloting are radar systems and camera systems to look at near misses, and also to do things like, well, so maybe a pedestrian, can we automate pedestrian calls? So if a pedestrian shows up, they don't even have to push a button. Probably not going to get there even with that technology, but you can also see if there's a pedestrian in the intersection. If not, then you don't have to, you can basically cancel the pedestrian call. So our traffic engineers are doing that. Also with radar, you can see, how fast a truck is coming at an intersection. And if it's turning red, you can hold the lights red so the truck clears and nobody gets in the path of that truck that, can be sensed and that it's not stopping. So there's some real safety things. And then maybe there's more automation that we do support at an intersection. Yeah, and we're really driving it, upgrading our signal controllers for a next generation of transit signal priority, where they don't have to shoot an infrared beam at the traffic signal. They can, communicate with the server based on schedule, so that way they don't have to be in the line of sight of the intersection. And we can also sort out, like, okay, if two buses are coming from different sides at an intersection, which one gets the signal priority? It's the bus that's later, has more passengers on board through APCs. Put that all into a quick, split-second process that sends back out a call and decides which transit vehicle gets a longer green or shorter red traffic signal.
Thank you. We've had several questions broadly about the impact of COVID, from changing work patterns to people maybe not wanting to carpool or vanpool or take transit for fear of being close to each other. And just requests if you kind of collectively can address that a little bit more about what we've seen or what we anticipate.
Caleb, I'm going to let you go first.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I answered a little in the chat that we're looking at major trends, emerging trends and things that aren't just observed, impacts or, that we're still experiencing, but what's going to last several years, a decade, longer. And yeah, not quite sure what we'll find out of that study, but we definitely know that transit ridership is going to recover slowly. The news we just got this week is that TriMet, our regional transit provider, has been trying to recruit more transit operators and fell short, and now have to cut service to make sure whatever they're operating is reliable. So that's a temporary cut until we can hire more drivers. It's just so these challenges are continuing, and that's going to impact how and when ridership recovers. But because all because we saw some transit lines still have 50-60% ridership. We looked at what income levels were of those transit routes and found, okay, this is where essential travel is happening, where workers need the supported transit service. And so that's going to really help us plan transit service in the future. Carpools, I know we put out a bunch of guidance of best practices for safety, and there was kind of a pause on encouraging carpools, but we're back to carpool and vanpool. But I'm not sure how that's been affected, or what a long-term strategy is around that. And I guess I should point out, we have 4.2 miles of a HOV lane that only operates in the PM peak. So we've taken a pretty, we don't have a lot of time-saving incentive on freeways when people opt into carpools. A lot of employers offer better parking spaces and other incentives, but we don't have as robust a system as you'd find in Seattle or other areas where there's a lot of HOV lanes.
Thanks, Caleb. Yeah, this is, I'm really glad somebody brought this up, because this is almost an existential question for travel choice, the travel choice world, and we don't know the answer yet. Caleb gave one strong answer, which is get back the folks that may have stopped carpooling and vanpooling because of their work situation or their own personal feelings. So providing that information on safety is really important. And the second part is celebrating the fact that we may have a much larger proportion of people working from home. So doing our best to provide technical assistance to employers, to commuters themselves. Years ago, we used to have little brochures that said how to approach your boss about working from home, that kind of stuff as well. So communication is really the key, but this is a huge issue. It's not just for carpool, vanpool, it's, for transit, for the ride sharing services. It's a huge issue that I don't think we have an answer for it. So it's the question of the day, but I think right now, just encouragement, information, and batten down the hatches and let's ride the storm.
I think an important thing behaviorally that you just mentioned, Eric, is that for people who have had options to work from home, now there's some flexibility, and that has resulted in there's data across many cities of flattening out the PM and AM and PM peaks. But of course, there's a lot of midday travel, and our freight partners are not happy about that, because they used to use and rely on the middle of the day as a good time to get their freight moved around the city or through the region. But that's a different demand environment we're working in, and hopefully people are primed to, I can make some different choices about, and there's hopefully more flexibility from employers about when I arrive at work, or if I need to telecommute.
Yep. Amy, I suggest that we actually move on to the last couple of sharing, and then we'll hopefully have some time at the end for some questions. Is that okay?
That would be wonderful. Go ahead, Eric.
All right, let me get to the next spot here. Hold on a sec. I opened the wrong one. Give me 1 second here, folks. I apologize. All right. We're almost there. All right, here we are. So we've talked a lot about the strategies themselves, the choices themselves, but then the question is, how do we get people to use them? And I think, again, the big difference between now and 20, 25 years ago is using information technology to provide incentives for getting people to try these travel choices. So we rely now on not only our TDM planners and managers becoming not becoming, but getting to know traffic engineering. We're also getting to know behavioral economics, which is really understanding how people make choices. And so a lot of this has to do with incentivizing travelers to overcome their perceived barriers to inconvenience of an alternative. These incentive programs, as you'll see, have been shown to be very cost effective, and technology is enabling the wider use of incentives. Caleb mentioned the program in the Portland region where you do, through the vendor Ride Amigos, you actually track your alternative mode trips. They provide incentives for their use. They have specific challenges. They use a lot of ways to engage youth through technology, engage commuters, and to provide specific incentives. So what are the different strategies to promote travel choices? Well, you have to tailor your messaging. You know, this may come into what we talked about with the COVID response, tailoring messages to travelers to help them make choices, providing the right incentives using specific information. So we're going to talk about each of those. So what are the messaging strategies? One set might be try it, you'll like it, just try it. There's lots of ways to provide a free trip if there's a cost associated with it, but it's just nudging people at the sort of right moment. So try it, you like it, try it again, and then sort of make it a habit, and helping people commit to using an alternative. Although, as Caleb said, you don't have to, if you're using 3 or 4 modes, but some of it on an occasional basis, that's okay. But it's really getting at some personal values and identifying what those personal values are. The values of millennials tend to use alternatives much more than older folks, but their reasons for doing it are different. They're not necessarily economic, although some of them may be because they tend to get their license in cars later. But millennials have very different messaging required, and then use it well and offer and often make the ride a social event. Track yourself. I'll talk about an example where you create an avatar of your travel self. It's just little things like that that to an old dog like me don't make sense, but resonate with a lot other folks. So those are some of the messaging strategies. What are some of the incentives? Well, clearly there's pure subsidies. I noticed that this comes around about every 10 years, but regions are thinking about free transit again because of the reduction of ridership. But there's other ways than that. There's ways of subsidizing and targeting specific subsidies, including, as I said, these try it before you buy, try it, you'll like it. But even if you don't provide what in essence is a cash subsidy, you can do it through rewards and raffles for gift cards, et cetera, et cetera. And then gamification has come into this a lot, where people actually like to compete with each other and then actually compete. There's actually ride-sharing incentive programs where people can either, in essence, ask for 50 cents a day in way of a travel allowance, or enter themselves into a raffle for $5 or $100. So it's all these sort of little behavioral economic strategies that are coming to TDM. So financial incentives for each non-SOV trip, often done through gift cards rather than cash. Sometimes cash is difficult, and second, it can be a political issue. Mode shift incentives, we'll talk about a 90-day try it, you'll like it. Financial incentives for time and destination choice, I'll give an example of that. And gamification. Again, once again, the Dutch have come up with something called From 5 to 4. It's literally driving 4 days a week instead of 5 days a week. And this is the one where you create an avatar and compete with other groups within your employer, other employers, other towns. And there's even tolling incentives. I don't have an example of this, but in LA, if you carpool or use transit in their toll lanes, you actually get toll credits. So if you, and I know that may sound a little bit backwards, but if you use an alternative, it actually helps you in your overall toll account, and that toll account can be used for transit trips as well. And then finally, what are some of the information strategies? Well, you need to cover all modes. You know, we had a question about how do you make sure that the information apps include not only the roadway system and transit, but bike walk. And so covering all modes with whatever your technology and incentive is very important, even to the point of highlighting non-motorized and electric options, the cleanest type of options walking, making sure that that's real-time, absolute real-time information. Here in San Diego, we have a toll lane that started out as a carpool lane and then shifted to a toll lane. But when it was HOV and even tolling, at first, they didn't have comparative travel times. So the whole reason for using the toll lane or carpooling in it is to have a travel time advantage, a more reliable travel time. But all the traveler information didn't show the difference in time between the regular lanes and the price lanes. It was just and it was a technology. I mean, they put all the technology in, but nobody thought of providing that real-time information. Making comparisons between modes, or in this case, between facilities, is a strategy. Being very clear on any payment strategies, payment instructions, if there is a specific payment to be made with the shared use mode. And I will say that locally, you know, Commuter Ride, CityGo, Boise State all have information on choices, and all do a really good job of providing information on traveler choices. And the question is, how can that be ramped up with more real-time information and apps that people want to use? So let's get to some, and then in terms of enabling legislation, this is not a typo, but cell phones, GPS cell phones have totally changed, obviously, our lives, but have changed travel as well. GPS-enabled cell phones allow us to track people's travel behavior, not just the old loop counters in roads, but groups like INRIX collect information from cell phones. So, but more importantly, users are getting better and better real-time information and demanding more from their apps. And a lot of these apps are not coming from the public sector. Because of institutional and funding issues, a lot of times it will take years, and it has all to do with organizational issues, years to come up with fully integrated. And a lot of times private entrepreneurs, if they have access to the data, can do it in a better, faster way. So for example, some regions, I was working in Columbus, Ohio, and they had a small sort of incubator funding program to come up with new apps for travel choices, and that was one of their main strategies for the near term. Waze, Uber, Lyft, they all have their own carpool programs and can be tailored. And even proximity tracking, we don't have a good way to virtually determine occupancy of a vehicle yet. We're getting really close, but you can even tell, and there's apps that can tell what mode a person is using by their speed, determined by the GPS and the cell phone that is hopefully in your pocket and not in your hand. All right, now I think we can move to some examples. So in the terms of incentives, the two examples I wanted to provide were that wacky one, again, from the Netherlands, called rush hour avoidance. So people would get a transponder and put the transponder in their car, and the transponder would only ping if they were on the freeway during the AM peak. So you had a transponder, and it only, in essence, penalized you if the transponder picked you up on the specific segment that was heavily congested, under construction. So they paid you $4 a day, or the chance at a raffle for a cell phone, not to travel between that period. Half of the people in the program avoided travel at that time, and the Dutch have now expanded this rush hour avoidance throughout the country, not only for construction projects, but for just very highly congested bottlenecks. And then a program that's actually been around for 20 years is Cash for Commuters in Atlanta, where they were paying people $3 a day in cash up to 90 days for using an alternative. And you had sort of a tracking sheet as a commuter. That tracking sheet would have to be verified by your employer, and you could get $3 a day for using an alternative for up to 90 days. In the first pilot, they had 1,800 commuters be involved, and that led to 1,300 fewer car trips on an average basis. So actually that was quite encouraging. But the biggest news of the evaluation of Cash for Commuters is after the 90 days was over, 7 out of 10 commuters continued to use the alternative without the incentive, and a full year later, half of them were using it. So the lesson there is that try it, you'll like it programs can be effective. Here's another program from MIT in Cambridge. They have a 5-pronged approach to reducing parking demand, but that also equates to traffic in and around the institution. They do give free unlimited transit access to employees using their university ID card. They've shifted from annual parking contracts to where you have to pay daily, so you've got to feel the parking cost every day. They have a commuter rail subsidy. They've subsidized parking at transit stations, but they have an online commute dashboard to compare travel modes and record trips for rewards. So this idea of a dashboard, of a personal dashboard, is a great idea. I helped Microsoft with their own company bus system. Microsoft operates one of the largest bus systems in the nation for their employees going into Redmond. And that system has an employee dashboard where you can look at, you can reserve a seat, but then you can also look at the impact it's having on your carbon footprint and on other regionals. So the program at MIT reduced parking demand by 15% by making these changes. Parking incentives, parking really impacts travel demand on the destination end. There was a program that was done by behavioral research folks at Stanford University that looked at congestion and parking relief incentive. Again, when a commuter to Stanford went either an off-peak time, parked at an off-peak time, or arrived at a more peripheral parking spot, they were rewarded from that. But the rewards were points. And they use gamification. This is where a person could either get like a 50% financial reward, or bet that reward on the chance at a larger number. And while it did impact parking behavior, it also found that some users shifted completely from driving to walking or biking because of their awareness of the impact that parking and that their overall trip making had. Finally, here we go back to Portland. Caleb is allowing me to steal the thunder on this because this program, it basically takes travel options and that technology and brings them together through something called a transportation wallet. And so in this case, for $99, a employee in specific, in this case, parking districts, can get a bundle of travel options and paid travel choices for a much discounted fee. And in some cases for low income folks, the wallet is free. So the wallet, which came out of Portland State and is implemented by the city of Portland, is a great way where options and technology come together. So here's a couple of resources from Federal Highways, again on specific traveler choices through incentives and the use of smartphones. We're running a little bit late, so I think we're going to move to the last segment, Amy, so that we have time for questions at the end. So I'm going to open that. Give me 1 second. Give me 1 second, folks. I apologize for the delay. I thought I'd opened it, but I hadn't. Here we go. Bear with me, we were doing so good. But I've got a little bit of an issue opening this last PowerPoint. Amy, do you want to open it on your end?
Sure, I will do that.
So now we're going to talk a little bit. Apologies, folks. I just got mixed up on modules. But we've got just a little bit of time that we want to leave time for questions. What we're going to talk now about is communicating the benefits. When Amy and Hunter came to us to talk about TDM, it was sort of like, we sort of need to know what the new views are, what it looks like. But even more so, we need to know, once we're in agreement on that, how to communicate, how to sort of encourage and even convince policymakers, decision makers, that communicating the benefits of TDM, that they've got the ammunition to do so. Before we do that, I'm going to say a very quick word about planning. Amy, if you could do the next slide. I don't think I have control. So something that the feds have done was about I don't know, 8 years ago or so, they did a process with their planning folks on integrating demand management into transportation planning. So just a word about that, and it's something that the Treasure Valley region has dealt with. A lot of plans include TDM and sustainability in their goals, but because of stovepiping, there being a highway plan and a transit plan and a bike walk plan, a lot of times TDM sort of never ends up in the specific set of projects. And so it's all about thinking about travel and choices and not people and not cars. And so there's really a need to integrate all these plans with demand management as a very integrated piece, and not just either a lofty goal or sort of an afterthought. So that's just a thought about planning. Next. So communicating the benefits. You know, here's some things that arguments that we've used that TDM checks a lot of the boxes for policy goals. We talked about that early. It covers a lot of potential policies: environment, traffic, livability. TDM is low cost as compared to supply solutions. TDM is cost effective in its own, for example, from the air quality side of reducing greenhouse gases. People want choices. Even if they don't use them, surprisingly, we found that people want travel choices. The shared economy is widely accepted, and so millennials are much more willing to use some of these new options. A real biggie is that the private sector is involved. There's not a lot of transportation areas that we have wide involvement of the private sector, unless it's a construction company building a road. But having developers and employers is very, very important. And finally, benefit cost ratios can now be calculated. And I would point you to a model called TRIMS, and you can Google that. But the TRIMS model is a way to estimate what TDM strategies might work for a given region or work site, and will actually allow you to do the societal cost and benefits. Next, Amy. TDM can be very, very effective. Here's some examples. Work sites that offer financial incentive have a much higher trip reduction than those without those that just offer choices. TDM is cost effective. A study of a variety of different emission reduction strategies showed that TDM, rideshare, van pool were among the highest. And TDM can help with travel flow, as Caleb very specifically shown, reducing VMT, but increasing, thinking about person throughput, not vehicle throughput, reducing delay and smoothing the peaks, another thing that Caleb mentioned. Next. Here is a list I just Googled from a very what I consider to be a very good program in Arlington, Virginia. Uses these as the specific benefits of TDM, some of which can be quantified, some of which can't. But there is the idea of this was just showing that there is a fairly long list. Next. So what are the benefits of TDM to business? Well, it enhances the worker's home life by having choices, by working from home, literally by just having the choice of how they get to work, and feeling that the employer, who in the past may not have cared about how they got to work, is now more interested in the whole life situation for their employees. It can enhance recruitment and retention. We're finding out post-pandemic that retention and recruitment can be extremely expensive. Employees that have worked for example, Hewlett Packard of the world will go into a new company and say, tell me what my commute benefits are. So employees sometimes will demand this. It has been shown to reduce employee stress. Not only not being behind the wheel or sharing the ride can reduce stress, reduce parking demand and cost. If you can reduce the need for parking, you can build. Parking is very economically inefficient. There's higher and better land uses for parking spaces that can be a benefit of reduced parking demand from reduced demand management. And schedule reliability. People that have a set commute schedule are more reliable. And it can serve environmental and sustainability goals, such as LEED goals for businesses. Next, I think we're just about there. Yes, so we're there. So here's my contact information. I am a semi-retired transportation planner, and I am now driving a school bus, which puts a whole new wrinkle on transportation management, but it's really fun. What I'd like to do is, Amy, turn it back to you for final questions. We do have a few minutes on benefits, on incentives, or any general questions. And here's the federal highway. I'm at the bottom of that slide, and you'll be able to access the slides. At the bottom of that slide was the resource for what federal highways has in the way of documents. Amy?
Sorry about that, Eric. I stopped your slide just 1 second too soon. Just to tag off what Eric just said, we will make both the slides and the video available, and I will send you out links to both of those as soon as we have them posted, so you will be able to access that. Question really kind of for both of you, although primarily I think probably for Eric, is if you could talk a little bit more about the coordination between transportation and land use working together to support TDM.
I'm going to have Caleb answer this too, because as you mentioned, that actually it was land use that prompted the need for demand management as they looked at densification of the urban area. Unfortunately, a lot of times land use transportation interaction comes down to transit-oriented development, and transit-oriented development can be highly successful, extremely expensive, and not. But how do you actually look at the full range of travel choices in its relationship to land use? And that's where I think Caleb's example of individualized marketing, of going into a community or a new community and talking about all travel options including public transit. So I think on the operational end, the marketing end, there's a lot that can be done with the full set of options. Transit-oriented individual information on transit trips has been shown to increase bike and walk trips as well, as people just start thinking about how they make decisions. And then on the planning front, land use and transportation again can come together in terms of trying to make sure that those travel options are built in physically and operationally, are built into new developments, or the travel choice idea is ingrained into how new developments are formed, and even about overall regional land use policy. And that's where I think Caleb can speak a little bit to Portland's experience with their urban boundary.
Yeah, I'll start with the individualized marketing example. I showed the transit increase, but really what was a major increase was just introducing residents to nearby, shopping, restaurants, and walking trips were really a highlight of increased mode and trips. Those trips that could have been made driving alone to a store that behaviorally people are used to farther away, now they were being made by walking and biking, and that so that's a big gain from residential outreach. And I should also say that that was the most studied of our projects, because Portland State University came back a few years later and found that those travel choices that actually continued, that behavior was wasn't declining precipitously at all. It was a permanent change for folks that had that individualized marketing. And also they just knew, I think there's another thing we learned from Australia, who pioneered part of that individualized marketing approach, is that people really supported more transit investment once they knew it was what it was all about and why it was there. So just that introduction paid dividends from the TDM project. The transit-oriented development is interesting. We learned long ago that you couldn't really be more effective in incentivizing immediately when people move into a new development. Adding a free transit pass or something wasn't like really, increasing mode split that much. And again, bike, transit, walk, those were all well supported just by where people are living in that transit-oriented development. So there wasn't really a lot more to do, maybe other than traveler information. And then some of the innovations I've seen in buildings are, they do more bike storage, especially near me, a lot of places have put in, their entryways of their apartments or condos have the bike parking, or there's a big bike corral downstairs with some amenities. I've seen one place that has a bike washing station. If you come back with your muddy bike, you can just put it in this big sink trough kind of thing and hose it down and clean it up. And of course, repair tools. And we've supported some of those permanent fixture air pumps and bike tool stations on trails and around. That's one kind of small capital investment we can make with TDM. But bigger picture land use, that to have an urban growth boundary, which the people wanting to go to forests outside the region, and the farmers, they wanted to see that. That was the choice in the mid-90s that the region made. They didn't want to see developments kind of patch quilted or around into their farm and forest land. But and that helps us build up the infrastructure to connect those cities. So the transit investments. But I like that. So we put in water and sewer. That really, that's part of the dividend that you get from being in a more compact area, is that those capital investments stretch out a lot farther. So yeah, the TDM definitely helps, even in that broad consideration.
Amy, since we only have about a minute left,
Oh,
I did. That's okay. No, I did want to respond to a couple of issues, not issues, a couple of chats that were put up, which was, a lot of the stuff that I talked about is already happening in the Treasure Valley with the apps and with commuter challenges. And so I do want to, on a normal longer workshop, we would have had some local presentations to talk a little bit about what's currently being done. So I don't in any way want to minimize what's currently being done. And I would encourage all of you to look at the chat, because there's some great examples of stuff that's already going on with Share the Ride Idaho, which I've looked at, which is really good. And then again, that there will be a winter challenge that's put together by Commuter Ride. So in no way do we want to in any way discount or ignore what was currently being done, but I do appreciate those of you that have put that in the chat. Amy?
Great, thank you, Eric. And yes, good point. There are links to Share the Ride in the chat, as well as contact information. Again, I will also share the slides. We'll post the slides and the video on our website, so you'll be able to find those to refer back to later. It is 11:30, and so I'd like to, first of all, thank you, Eric and Caleb, for your time today and sharing your expertise and your insights and experiences. And thank all of you who attended today as well. I think we had some great questions and some great discussion. I will follow up, as I mentioned, with the slides and the video. In that same email, I'll also have an evaluation form. Would appreciate if you can fill that out and return it to me. They do really help us make sure that we are putting together workshops and presentations to help serve your needs. So those evaluation forms are very important to us and really do help. So with that, thank you again, Caleb and Eric. Thank you, everyone. Also, if anyone has any last-minute questions that did not get answered, don't hesitate to reach out to me. You'll have my email address, and I can share those with Eric and Caleb, and we can get an answer to you.
Absolutely.
Thank you all very much, and enjoy the rest of your week.